It's beautiful here, so good afternoon or morning, as the case may be, to those of you tuning in. Our webinar today is about freeform planning. So this is a relatively new feature within the Oracle EPM suite. It's talked about a lot as kind of Essbase in the cloud. It's not Essbase itself, but it does share a lot of capabilities about that. So let's dive in and learn what this is all about. We're going to take a pretty high level view. We're also going to look at some screenshots and some process slides to see how it all works. And we're going to compare that to some other features, as well as kind of open it up for Q&A as well. So the way that this technology is being positioned is it's going to allow you to, if you are an EPM Cloud customer, you're using planning, you're using close, narrative reporting, profitability and cost, whatever it may be. If you've acquired that umbrella product, there's a new capability for you to generate a multi-dimensional cube free of the restrictions on the dimensionality side that planning has traditionally imposed on you. So you can go and create a cube without having to worry about necessarily having a scenario dimension, version dimension. You'll probably have accounts in some way, but you're not forced to have anything. So that's what freeform is about, and you get to use a lot of the features that planning offers without being burdened by dimensions that you might not want. So I'm going to show you how to do a few things. Move an Essbase cube from on-prem, where you might have an existing Essbase implementation, and make that a freeform application out in EPM Cloud. I'm going to walk you through the steps for how that works, and then we'll kind of talk about why you might want to do this, why you might not. For folks that may not be as familiar with the differences between planning and Essbase, the way these things have traditionally worked together. Most installations of Hyperion Planning have got their applications in planning, but the licensing also allows them to kind of slide into the side of their Essbase server and create standalone cubes that aren't part of the planning application. So within one Essbase server, I can have databases that talk to planning and completely separate databases, that are under my own control for what their dimensionality are. You weren't able to accomplish this over the last let's see, it was Valentine's Day 2014, so greater than 6 years that the Hyperion Planning product has been out on the cloud. You only get the applications that are behind, or the databases that are behind your applications, and you're not getting that kind of ability to treat dimensionality as you've always wanted to have the freedom to. So that would restrict us from the kinds of reporting applications that we could create within the planning cloud. And so we're trying to address that now. There's always been a difference between exactly what planning cubes were like and what Essbase cubes were about. One particular, are those required dimensions that we were talking about. You always would have to have a period dimension separate from a year dimension. And sometimes you would prefer to have those combined. And if you're going to do that with a traditional planning application, that would lead to a lot of trouble. As far as the diversion dimension, you don't always need that. You may not really want to have your account dimension tagged as accounts or period. There's reasons not to do some of these things, and planning would kind of force you to do that. The specific name that you had to have for your year's account, for example. A lot of cubes don't really have an entity dimension. And then the way that you want to deal with approvals, it's the intersection of 3 different dimensions there. And you had to have those fully built out and modeled if you want to take advantage of approvals in any way. Now, on the Essbase side, on the other hand, you get complete control over that. I use different tools to develop those databases. It could be load rules with data coming in from other sources to build my hierarchies. I can build that specifically in the administrative tool, but it allows me to do whatever I want, combine those year dimensions, have a scenario or not have a scenario, have a version or not. And I can, other than keywords that are restricted, like dimension and member, things like that, I can have pretty much complete control over how I set up those dimensions, the names of them, what the hierarchies are, what the formulas are, what I find at level 0, how those things are organized, how many they are, what order they're in, dynamic, dense, sparse. I get complete control over that on the Sbase side. Well, come the new way that EPM Cloud is being marketed and packaged, we get this now. So it's the enterprise version of Oracle EPM Cloud, which typically we're recommending to the kind of clients that we worked with, larger companies, billion-dollar-plus companies. There is a place for this in the SMB market as well, but we're definitely recommending this enterprise level package to our clients that are larger business. And one of the big reasons is, what we're here to talk about today, the freeform Sbase, as well as, the addition of profitability and cost management, and the extra capabilities you get on the account reconciliation side, transaction matching, things like that. But now, if you're late to the game, you haven't heard the news, when you buy Oracle EPM now, you get all of this. So if you only want to do planning, that's great. You can just do planning. Used to be, I do strategic assessments at NRL, which means I try to help people plan their future for multiple years and set a roadmap, and help them understand dependencies and order of operations and why it might be better to do things first or not, or try to make a case for why you should use a technology that you're not using today. I would always have to make a case why I think you should be using narrative reporting, for example, why I think you should be using profitability and cost management or account reconciliation. And I always had to make so much of a case that I would have to convince somebody to go buy that thing because it was a separate product. This is really great, for me personally, the way that I make recommendations, but also for companies, clients as well, because they can acquire this and turn on whatever parts of it are appropriate for them. So now we can just talk about how are you going to use the profitability and cost model? How are you going to use account reconciliation? And if you don't want to use it, or you don't want to use it yet, you just leave it there, leave it on the shelf, turn it on later. This is really great. And this, as we're moving people off of the older cloud individual products and moving them into the enterprise environment, we are taking a planning application, for example, and building out those applications. That's basically a lift and shift. It's very easy. It's no real difference. But then we get this guy right here, and we're able to create new kinds of applications, new kinds of multidimensional reporting or analytic cubes that we weren't able to do before. And it's all built in. All we have to do is get the environment, get the pod set up, and then we can go and create a new model. And there's no extra cost. The costing is all about users. So if I can have one user hitting multiple applications, multiple databases, I'm getting more out of my investment in this technology. So the more I can leverage this, the more I can kind of get a return on the investment if I can empower my users to go in all different areas. So as we were saying, we don't have to deal with all the same dimensions as we've always had before. We can think of this in a general sense as Sbase as software as a service. So that takes care of all the maintenance and installation and patching, updates, new features, and I don't have to do anything for those upgrades and those refinements and those improvements to happen. And they roll in new features. I get them without having to do the patching. So that's the well-known advantages of being on software as a service, a purely cloud product where I'm not involved with server maintenance or any kind of upgrades to my operating system or the applications that live on that. I can go and have control over whether I create those cubes either as block storage or aggregate storage or the newer hybrid. So I've got some stuff to talk about hybrid later, but for those of you that have dealt with hybrid in the past, like maybe in your on-prem Sbase or earlier you might have had your planning applications put in SR and change your database to hybrid. There's been traditionally, some difficulties dealing with hybrid. The engine behind these freeform applications that are running in hybrid is kind of a hyper-patched version of Essbase that's servicing the cloud products. So it's a better hybrid engine than you will ever have seen on-prem or probably have dealt with before, unless you've been working in Oracle Analytics Cloud when Essbase was part of that, or you're working with 19C. Not a lot of people doing that yet, but the hybrid engine here is good, and I'll tell you more about that in a bit. You get that ability to access the application over the web or SmartView, kind of the same thing that you're able to do with planning now. I can define forms and do all of that, and I can create large models. If I want to make a nice, big ASO cube, a lot of dimensions, a lot of members in those dimensions, I can do that. And it actually works pretty well. I've been kind of doing some beta on it here over the last couple of weeks, actually. And until you get into the world where you're looking at hundreds of thousands or a million or something members in the dimension, getting pretty good performance there as well. So it's not perfect yet, but it does work pretty well. So let me walk you through what it looks like to create an application. It's pretty straightforward. I just want to let you get a chance to see what it looks like. A lot of people haven't seen this yet, haven't even seen Cloud Enterprise yet. So I'm going to show you a little bit of that. There's ability to just import an outline file. If you have one available, you got an on-prem Sbase, your outline is out there, it's in a file. I can bring that in. I can do a lifecycle management snapshot, so not just the outline, but also additional artifacts that I can pull out of an LCM import. And there's a new ability to create the cube through a wizard, so I can just walk through in the interface on the cloud and get started with the cube, and then I want to flesh it out afterward, but I don't have to begin with an outline file or an LCM. Now this is where we're going to get started. We've got an EPM Cloud application. This may be the first look that some of you are having at what this looks like. Like, how does EPM Cloud Enterprise actually work? You'll have a series of pods or applications or processes available to you, and each one of them is a little bit different URL, and each one of them can take on any one of these roles that you're seeing here. Any one of them I can reconfigure at any time to be enterprise data management, narrative, account rec, planning, any of these. So each one of them is completely capable of taking on any one of these different types of process roles. So there's one place. So what I'm going to do here, if I'm going to do freeform planning, I'm just going to go to the planning button here. So we don't see freeform as an option here, but we will see it when we get deeper into it. So it is freeform planning. So we're going to go into the planning button here, right there. And then as we go into it, we're going to see we've got a few options here. So, the sample application, this is just going to be when you're learning the ropes. You just kind of want to see an application as it works. We've got creating a new application, and we've got a migrate. So the migrate is going to be something you're bringing in from a different planning application. You'll have a snapshot from Planning Cloud somewhere, and you'll bring it in and import it to this. What we're going to do for freeform is right here. So we're creating a new application. So this is, as if in any other way that we're building a planning application, we're going to do this. It's kind of a little bit confusing. I'll go back because because we have been talking about migrating using lifecycle management tools and all of that. So just keep the terminology straight here. This is a new application, and inside of this new application, we'll have the ability to bring in those migration artifacts or build out through the wizard. You'll see here, once I get in here, I'm going to have a drop down on what my options are. So I've got custom. That's going to be a planning application that has all of the standard dimensions. This is my traditional, Hyperion planning application that I would have built on-prem or the old PBCS, Planning Budgeting Cloud Service, in the past. I also have the option for modules. So this is where, the financials come in, or capital, or workforce, or projects, or something like that. It's that prepackaged set of dimensions, rules, dashboards, all kinds of things that are built around those pre-built best practice prepackaged modules. And then here a new one in the center called Freeform. So this is where we're going today. We're going to go into Freeform and get a little bit of a branching point here, so we can choose exactly how we're going to create the new application. So, of course, I can give it a name, the application and cube, and then I'm either going to bring in, at this point, an outline from the local. So this will be off of my own disk, like my own computer. If I got the outline file locally, I can just load it up. Or I could have already uploaded it through EPM Automate or the user interface and have it in the inbox already. I'm going to recommend this way if the outline is significantly large. I was working with a 1.37 gigabyte outline file as part of my testing, and I just tested it this way, and it kind of took a long time. I would rather do it in two separate parts, upload it first, and then I can just initiate the import through the wizard later on. So this is how I do it when I'm bringing in either the outline or the LCM. It can deal with either one of them. One of them will be a .otl file. One of them will be a .zip file. And then we'll be able to tell which is which and do the import from there. So if I'm going to do that, I'm going to go into EAS, right? Here's the outline that I want to migrate. And then I can, just locate the one that I want to do, get to the outline node here. I can review it and make sure that, it's in good shape that I want to move over. And then I can create an LCM here. So I go into shared services. If you haven't done this before, it's not difficult. Within your workspace, you'll go to the administrator menu, open up shared services, and you'll get a number of nodes that you can expand. Application groups is where you'll want to go. The Sbase area. So we've gone here, and then we're going to go part 2 is open up the Essbase cluster. That's kind of the name of my server. That's how I reference that. Then I'm going to pick a specific database inside of there, or application that I want to load. It's going to be an application at this point. And then I get to choose all of the different artifacts to include inside of it. So what I'm going to want to do here is really pick one of my databases. This one only has one. And then I can add whichever one of these that I want included. Calc scripts, that's a good one, rules files, things like that, and they'll be included as part of the LCM. Once I choose that, then I can go and I can do export, and that'll take me to here. So what that's going to do is drop a new entry here under open items, and this is going to be a feature you're going to want to be on. By the way, Hyperion 11.124, because that's the compatible version that we're going to do this. One of the good features of that is once I've created the LCM, I can just right-click on that and download it to my own laptop. So I'm allowed to get it off of the server. Sometimes, like back in the past, we could create these LCMs, but then we couldn't get at them unless we had access to the file system on the server. This is a great feature of the later versions. I can create it and I can download it. I can turn on upload it to another environment if I want to. In this case, I'm going to upload that to the cloud. which is great. The other way to do this, if I'm not going to bring in all those different artifacts, but just the outline file, I can still go into EAS, look at the outline, make sure that the way I want it to be, and then I open the outline. So I'll double click that or do a file open, and then I'll have the outline, and then I can do a save as, and I can save that to my local drive, and to my C, and then from there, I'll be able to upload just that little outline file. So both of these are going to go through that same menu option of outline or LCM. So I'll import that. Either one of these options works. EPM Automate, you can see here, this is the way you get that upload into the inbox. You can just issue an upload command in the EPM Automate tool to get it out there into your environment for import that way. So once I do that, it will have processed that zip file or the outline file, and it'll kind of give me some feedback on what that looked like, what it thought of it, and then I can just, if that all makes sense, then I can just click the create button right here, as you can see, and then we'll get to the next step where it's going to go out and actually start adding those dimensions out there in the cloud and building those hierarchies up and getting that outline ready for me to work. This can take a bit of a while depending on exactly what it is that you're importing. So just let that run and it'll finish up. These two examples are when I'm doing the OTL file or the LCM file. You can see here a little bit of difference between those screenshots. Essentially, they work the same. Once that's done, then I can log out, I can log back in, and this is what I'm going to get. If you've worked with the cloud planning product before, this should look very, very familiar. I get a lot of the same stuff that I get from Planning Cloud available to this application, even though it's freeform, even though those dimensions are whatever I need them to be. I can still go in and use the rules editor. I can create infolets dashboards, work with data forms, and create those forms in the same methods that I have before. So that's all really cool. I can still do task lists. I can do approvals if I still have version scenario and entity dimensions, and we'll get a little bit more about how those are created a little bit later on. So you can see I can go into the dimension editor, navigate those. You can see, I'll have all of those. Of course, once I get into the cloud, managing and editing those dimensions is a good bit different than it was before. There's no EAS if you've only been on-prem before. All my administrative work is going to be done differently. There's actually a SmartView add-in that I can use to do metadata hierarchy editing and management in Excel and kind of send that up and down from the cloud as well if you want to do that. Or there's an online interface to work with the dimensions and work with them manually as well. I still have the ability to import them through a few different tools, to upload from flat files or something like that. They're going to define my dimensions as I moved out here, and now it's going to live out here in the cloud as my application. So you can see here, this is when I'm going to walk through that wizard. So instead of importing something, I'm going to start from scratch. I've got nothing. So what I'm going to do is pull in dimensions, right? So account, period, and entity are going to be part of these beginning steps for doing it. So in addition to my ability to control that as I'm creating it through a wizard, if I have imported it, by the way, it's going to figure out something, an account dimension. It's going to know that that's an account dimension within my new application. Period and entity, same thing. I can also define that as I go through. Other types of dimensions I'm going to have as custom dimensions on these new ones, on anything that I've imported there. So the way the wizard works is, instead of picking, I'm going to zoom in a little bit, instead of importing the OTL or LCM, I'm going to be able to choose one of these other ones. So you can see here my options are either BSO/hybrid or ASO. So I kind of up here, you can see that. I'm going to pretty much the same process once I do this. BSO and hybrid out in this cloud environment are basically the same. I will either have activated hybrid by creating dynamic hierarchies, or I will not. And the engine will just kind of deal with all of them, both of those configurations the same way. If it's possible to do hybrid, it will turn that on and do hybrid stuff. If you haven't configured it in such a way that hybrid would even be a factor, then all that stuff will be ignored and it'll just be a regular old BSO cube. So as I go here, I'm creating it. I'm going to be able to fill in the name of that application and describe it. It's pretty straightforward. Get to the next screen. This is where it starts to get interesting. It's going to ask me to create 0 or more dimensions. So if I know I'm going to have an account dimension or an account type dimension, I can go ahead and click this box over here that I'm gonna have that type. I can still name it anything that I want. If I'm gonna have an entity type dimension, same thing. I can activate it through this checkbox over here. Period as well. So I can give all the different names. However many one of these I want to have active at the beginning, I can just create them here. Any other ones I'm going to create custom later. This is the way I get those ones that are going to be tagged as special type dimensions. Account, entity, and period are special type dimensions in the planning world. So I'll go through, make sure that I've set everything up right, and then we just do create. This runs a little bit faster because it's not doing a big import or whatever. It's going to create just a few dimensions, skeletal dimensions. There's no members in these yet. So this part's pretty quick actually. And then I'll get here. I can look at the dimension editor and kind of review, make sure that everything got imported correctly. As you can see here, my account dimension is properly tagged with its account or its dimension type, period the same, entity the same. You want to make sure that everything works right. I'm only going to have one cube within each one of these. This is a for each application. There's going to be one database. If I need to do multiple Sbase type cubes, I'm going to create multiple instances out there. So I'm not going to have, like plan types, I'm not going to have more than one. It's just going to be the one. But I can check all of those, decide whether I want to do security, right? This is exactly the way planning works. So I begin at this point to treat it like a planning application with those free-form dimensions. I get to do whatever I want to with them. So you can see here, for my different dimensions, I've only got the one member, right? So it created the dimension itself. I've got to go and do something to put members in. I can add additional dimensions, whatever additional ones that I'm going to need, just right through the interface. I click this plus up here and add new dimensions. Once I get inside of there, I'll probably build out my year dimension or scenarios or something like that manually, but I'm going to want to use some kind of import tool. There's a number of different ways to flesh out my hierarchies once I have the dimensions created. So some I'll do manually, some I'll do with my traditional planning dimension build techniques. There's a number of them, but the outline load utility being one of them. The dimension management tool can do this as well for these freeform apps as it does for planning applications. So I've got a lot of options there for how to actually get this thing fleshed out again. So now I've created the cube, and so now I've got to figure out what am I going to do from here. So there's a few things I need to do, make sure that my outline order is the way I want it. If you're familiar with Essbase optimization, if you've optimized planning applications before, I can do that same thing. I can decide whether I'm going to make it hybrid or not, which would mean making all of the parent levels, everything below level 0 in the top, all of those will be dynamic calc instead of being stored members on a sparse dimension. And then I'll let the hybrid engine at that point take over any aggregation that I need to do when I'm doing retrievals. Then I got to go back. If I'm migrating something from Essbase on-prem out to the cloud, I'm going to have to redo all the automations and the way those dimensions are built because there aren't any load rules that I can use. So that's not going to help me a lot. So anything I'm doing in load rules, I'm going to move to data management. Filters, Essbase filters don't really work the same way. Planning security is a little bit more menu driven, a little bit less powerful than I can do with Essbase filters, but any restrictions to data or levels of the hierarchy I'm going to need to do through planning security. So I've got to rebuild that too. There is an equivalent to the financial reports engine in the cloud. So there is a migration tool there. So if I am using FR to generate reports on my on-prem side, I can migrate that through, but this would also be a really good time to look at migrating into narrative reporting, where on the EPM Cloud Enterprise, narrative reporting is available to me. My recommendation, my suggestion would be anytime that you're doing new reporting on anything new that you're building out there in EPM Cloud Enterprise, narrative reporting is available to you. It is the future. It's got more capabilities than regular FR can. There's a few things FR can do, but you're definitely going to want to do any new reporting using the narrative reporting side of it. Get your feet wet there, learn how to do it, because there's a lot of really cool stuff, especially on the narrative side, that you're able to do. Anything you're doing in Maxell, of course, we don't have Maxell for cloud as well. We do that with EPM Automate. EPM Automate's pretty simple to do. If you're doing very complex things, you may actually to bounce out and do REST API stuff, which I love to do, right? Because I'm a programmer at heart. I like to use the Groovy programming language to do my REST API stuff. It's more robust than EPM Automate, but whatever meets your needs. If you learn how to do Groovy, though, you've got a lot of great customization capabilities for your business rules inside of EPM Automate. It's a whole different topic that I could really go off on if I let myself. But working with Groovy as a custom development technology inside of planning is a really hot new field, and I'm hoping to publish some material about that sometime in the future. And then you've got migrating from your tested production environment, rerouting how your SmartView connects to it, and then the way that you back up from the cloud is kind of completely different from how you back up in on-prem Sbase. So you're going to set up snapshots or happen automatically. You'll need to set up batch scripting to get that downloaded locally, because you don't want to just trust that the snapshots will be proper. If something happens, that the snapshots will be kept safe for you. You want to bring that on-prem so you can be assured that you'll be able to get back to the past. You have a rolling set of your nightly snapshots downloaded and archived, so you can get back if you need to where you were a day ago, a week ago, something like that. Once I've got all that, there's a lot of really cool planning features that I can still do. I can create dashboards through that same interface that I'm creating dashboards in planning. So this is a great way to layer on visualizations on top of Essbase cubes in a way that I've had to use OBI or Oracle Analytics Cloud to do that in the past. This technology is actually starting to take off. There's a new dashboarding engine that they're rolling in, Dashboards 2.0. For the time being, you can use either one. But as the Dashboards 2.0 really takes hold and gets refined, there's going to be new ways to do that. There's a lot of really cool stuff, and I hope you're familiar with some of these, because I got excited about the idea of freeform planning, these Essbase type cubes. As I'm learning, I can still create data forms the same way that I was before and predefine what the grid layout is, what's in the rows, what's in the columns, what's in my drop-down boxes, and things like that. Navigation flows, I really, really like this user interface element that's part of EPM Cloud now. It's really cool to lay out like a grid of available forms. You've got horizontal tabs, and you've got vertical tabs as well. So the vertical tabs over here, I'm going to select a group of forms, and then I can navigate through those forms through my horizontal tabs. And it's a really great way to kind of walk somebody through. I select one of my horizontal tabs, and then I can walk through the different forms that get me through that section. Like this might be for revenue. And then I can do to the next one, and that might be around expenses, and I can walk through those forms. And the next one might be workforce, and I can walk through those. I can still turn on approvals. I can create calc manager rules, similar to what I was doing on-prem with Hyperion Planning, and Essbase rules as well. Create those visually. This is improved technology out in the cloud than it was on-prem, and I can also create those groovy-based business rules that I was referring to before. I've got the ability to use either one of these reporting technologies, and then it all looks the same. I can work with my planning applications and my Sbase type analytic reporting applications through the same interfaces, using the same tools, and it's all out there on the cloud. So I get to take care of all of that. This is a quick look about what dashboards look like. I can pull forms in. I can define visualizations. I can look at things in a grid. All of these can be tied together. So if I click on different things, these things will reroute themselves. They're all can be tied together to a common point of view up here. So as I change this drop down and I hit go over here, all of these things will be updated to give me the visualization, the grid, the charts, all around the same set of data across the entire dashboard. So that's really cool. I can still go and work with my forms. This is what it will look like on the web. So there's a newer web grid engine that works a lot better than what you might have had to deal with before in Workspace or even in older versions of the cloud. So this grid is relatively new, and it's fast, and you can navigate around, and it's similar to what you've seen if you've worked with navigation flows in the past. If you've worked with composite forms, you'll know that those were difficult to work with and they were slow, and this is a next generation grid capability through your web browser. This is the same data, same form I'm pulling into SmartView. So I just do the same connection as before, navigate to that application. I decide which form I want to open. I bring that in, then SmartView renders it here. I've got my writable cells, I've got my read-only cells, I've got my drop-downs, the same as I do here in the form on the web. I've got the same capabilities to drop down, change my settings here, do a refresh, and get a new set of data here. So this should all be really familiar to you if you've seen the planning cloud stuff before. There's a little bit of a difference between how I'm connecting to those cubes. In the past, I will have connected to Essbase through what we call an Essbase Connection. There's a lot of kind of more raw, pure capabilities there, more similar to the old add-in. The planning connection is what we'll be using now. Is in development. Actually, this bullet list is not as differentiated as it was just a while ago when I assembled this slide. Some of these things that are differences between the experience of the old Essbase connection and the planning connection, they are becoming more similar. You can turn on a certain mode in planning ad hoc that allows you, for example, to have your point of view in row one like we're used to on an Essbase connection. We weren't able to do that before. Certain fun things that you can do, changing the position of the ancestor when I do a zoom in, things like that. I'm getting more options for zooming. I can zoom in on multiple things now through the planning connection. I can highlight 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things and zoom in on all of them at the same time. I wasn't able to do that before. That's new capability. So some of those differences that have driven people away from planning connections in the past, they're falling away, and that type of connection is becoming more viable for use. As we mentioned before, you're going to have one cube per instance. So if you're thinking about buying EPM Cloud Enterprise, anything like that, you're going to want to have a really comprehensive vision of how you're going to want to use it, how many of these freeform type applications you're going to want. You're going to want to get all of those instances set up at the beginning. It's a little bit of a chore, hurdles that you got to go through to add more later on after you're live. So go ahead and be ambitious in speccing out how many different instances that you're going to need. That'll include your planning and your close and your reporting and your profitability and however many freeform applications you're planning to have out there. So for hybrid, let's go ahead and get into that a little bit, because some people won't really have dealt with a really successful version of hybrid just yet. If you've seen it on-prem, it may not have really blown your socks off, but it's a lot better, the version that's available here on these freeform apps. So essentially, anything that you create as BSO, you can do as hybrid as you want. Hybrid is just going to be enabled. It's just going to be a matter of if you have configured the hierarchies in a way to take advantage of it. So what hybrid does, gives you the full ability to use calc scripts, that entire robust calc script language that's been available in Essbase for all these years. We can take advantage of that, and we can write calc scripts that do really complex things and allocations and data copies and all those things that we need that robust engine to do for us. But on the other hand, we can avoid having to roll up the database. We can avoid having to do aggregations in all these multiple dimensions, because layered on top of all that is the ability also to do the really fast aggregations in real time that the ASO engine does. So if I take a sparse dimension and the only members I have as stored members are at the very bottom of that hierarchy, and those things up above I'd set as dynamic calc, then it's going to know when I do queries at the higher level of that hierarchy to go and turn on that ASO aggregation engine and roll that stuff up really fast and get me those results like I'm used to from an ASO type cube. So that's really cool. I will have to, when I turn this on, go and check some things that the application is calculating for me, especially dynamic calc member formulas. I need to really kind of carefully look at that and make sure that I'm getting the right numbers. I may need to go and change the order that things are being calculated in. For those of you that are familiar with ASO, it's actually pretty cool because they've moved the solve order concept into the BSO world. So I can define, really finely control in what order things are rolled up, calculated, or fed to some other calculation, throughout the dynamic calculation engine. So that's really great. I can refine solve order and solve some of those problems that I've had to do through calculation order and some fancy tricks with UDAs and things on the BSO side when I couldn't really control the order of calculations like I could before. And then there's there's published work about how to deal with different optimization techniques, ways to improve your cubes that are kind of run afoul of what we're used to in on-prem Essbase tuning. But this is kind of a modern version of that. You want to read through any of those design guides to make sure you're not using outdated design concepts that date back, way back. They have a hard time going away, some of these older tips. But this is a good time to refresh what you think you know about Essbase optimization while you go out into this. A lot of different advantages to having hybrid. One of them is the database size. If we're only storing level 0 blocks, you can imagine the size of that database coming down. I was working with a client just a couple of months ago, and they had an application that had, I think, about 90 page files. So we're talking about like 180 gigabytes of data. And the most amazing thing happened. I converted that entire database over to a hybrid database, and I went from that 180 gigabytes to 10 megabytes worth of disk space being demanded by that cube, and it worked really well. This was in Analytics Cloud, so it was the new hybrid engine, and it worked really well. And I didn't have to aggregate all those dimensions. It took hours, and my retrievals were just as fast as they ever were. So that was really great. You can see that's going to reduce your processing time. What it takes to load that data, I don't have to wait potentially hours for it to roll up. I can just begin to retrieve data. That fixes my downtime. Everything should run faster if it's all set up and tuned well. So there's a lot of really cool things that you can take advantage there. There's a few downsides still to hybrid, and sometimes we need to do kind of an in-between. Maybe pick one dimension to keep it to be stored and let all of the other sparse dimensions be dynamic. But you're going to take that on a cube by cube basis and decide how to deal with that. Different ways that you can test and tune on the hybrid side. All of your dense and sparse dimensions are going to come in. But what you're going to want to do is anything that you have stored or never share at the upper levels, you want to undo those and set those to dynamic calc. And make sure that you audit, look at everything that you have that's currently dynamically calculated on your formulas, audit all of those. And then there are different needs for optimization here. So you may need to tweak out the order of your dimensions, or as we were saying, work with that solve order that gives you a lot more finer level of control over how things are calculated. So just a complete data validation step once you do that migration to make sure that people are getting accurate data. So we've been covering all of this stuff about all this new stuff and freeform planning and how it's being talked about as a new way to get Sbase capabilities out in the cloud. Well, what about Sbase itself? So that's not going anywhere. There's still a product being sold and marketed, updated, worked on that's called Essbase itself that I can acquire standalone. So the good news is, if you're an Essbase enthusiast, my own excitement and enthusiasm for Essbase goes all the way back to the year 2000. We still have the ability to do hardcore Essbase applications that aren't hiding behind a planning interface. I'm going to require that separately. It's the current version that's out right now is called 19C. There's new versions that will be coming out. The best place to run Oracle right now is to be in Oracle Cloud Infrastructure and installing 19C there if you're doing a new implementation. So Essbase is being developed right now. Its target being Oracle Cloud Infrastructure first. So it's going to be available there and then ported to other environments like non-commodity hardware, Windows, standard Linux, things like that. But those become later. If you want the earliest patches, the earliest versions, new features, the best place to have all that available earlier will be in 19C. So there'll be some decisions to make, if you're an Essbase shop that also does planning, also does close, how do we deal with that? So we've got all these different options for how to deliver that same kind of multidimensional reporting and analysis. One thing is off the table now, and that's OAC Essbase. So that was something that was available, until, about a year ago. It was part of Oracle Analytics Cloud. Now it's not, it's standalone. Do you want to wait for the next version of Essbase? I'm not sure exactly when that's coming out, 20C, 21C, but the next version, the naming scheme has changed now. It's going to be named after the year that it's released, like the database products are. As far as these alternatives, moving your native cubes to the cloud, these are basically your two best options right now. Take those things, migrate them out into your cloud EPM environment, or get that Essbase set up in OCI, and it's still Essbase right there. I'm still doing all the same things that I were before, load rules and things that aren't part of planning, Maxell automations and things like that. It's much more of a recognizable, traditional, familiar Essbase administrative experience there. And so moving over, you'll see if I've got these things here, these are my service instances, so I've got different ones, and I'm going to need to put each one of those in individual instances. So if I've got other cubes that I've had in the past, I can migrate them in, I can create new ones. I can move data between different instances pretty easily, but the only place I'm going to be able to really tie cubes together within the same instance will be, these actual products, Planning Cloud or Close, things like that. So you can see my planning cubes are associated, and I can do those with data maps and kind of push them without having to configure it to look over and see other instances and have the more complex data interchange there. For Essbase, anything that I've got in planning or Close, I'm going to have to put that in the cloud. Out here is a SaaS solution, and my Essbase stuff is going to go in a different place. Infrastructure as a service, migrate those cubes here And then I've got to worry about how this integration works. This is not going to be as easy as integrating between stuff like this that's all within the SaaS world. Not that you can't do it, but it's not as easy to share data, hierarchies, and things like that if I've got a separate Essbase installation set up somewhere like that. So there's a few things that we learned as we go through testing and refinement and working with Oracle on this freeform stuff. There is a little caveat in the documentation that says, you may wind up with forms that winds up being read-only when you open it up. We haven't actually seen that happen, so that's the good news. I'm not sure exactly what the little warning is within the documentation on LCM imports, but that might be the first thing that you want to check. Bring something in from LCM, data and hierarchies to go and make sure that the areas are writable that you want them to be writable to. There can be some issues with creating the application, so we have seen a couple fails here. Sometimes it's just a timeout because it takes a long time to load that. If you close this and log out and back in, sometimes it actually is fine. So you'll want to, not give up if you see this, but check it out. If you do have things that you need to deal with, you can go into job details. This will be right in the job panel. You can see the details, kind of look through and see what might have changed. You can, as we say, log out and log back in. You might be able to rescue that and not have to start over from scratch, but you'll be able to see what issues it might have been some issue with the outline, something that would actually authentic or validate in the on-prem world, but it doesn't validate out here. You'll get some tips on what you can change and improve so that you can kind of rescue that application and not lose it and have to start over or make changes on your on-prem side before you bring it in. And then, we have seen sometimes the dimension order get messed around. You go into dimensions performance settings, make sure that this is the order that you want them to be. Typically, you'll have, accounts first and then periods second, or the other way around as your dense dimensions. You can see here, I might want to take entities and push it down and get a more typical hourglass shape or hourglass on a stick, whatever that you like, whatever you're used to. And that's kind of everything. I don't think I've had a bunch of questions come in, none actually, but I have set aside a few minutes for Q&A. So if anybody wants to throw in, a question in the Q&A box, I'll do my very best to give you a good answer there, or try and commit to give you a better answer than I can come up with myself in real time and get it back to you later. So if anybody has the first question, you can type it in there. It's possible that I have 100% educated you about this topic and there's nothing left to learn. I'm willing to accept that possibility. But if no one actually has questions, that's good. That's actually fine. We'll get just a couple of minutes back out of our day. I do want to give you a couple of things to leave on. You can see that this is today's webinar here. I've got a couple of more coming up in a week from now. This is really, really popular these days. If you haven't seen this one, we're doing this, it's kind of backed by popular demand. This presentation about the EPM tools that are proving themselves really, really useful right now in this crazy 2020 world. How people are using tools and technology to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, the economic upheavals, and different things that people are dealing with that were unexpected this year, but have definitely come our way. And then a week after that, we'll also have a presentation about Workiva. So coming in, being able to tie your data that's coming out of your Hyperion systems, get certain kinds of reporting together with the Workiva environment. So Workiva has actually been expanding beyond their external reporting world that they've lived in, they're really good at, into other areas of financial reporting. And I've actually, let me back up. I've got one question that come in. If we already have EPBCS and EPM, is it possible to integrate the two and just do away with EPBCS? The answer to that, if I understand your question right, is going to be yes. So what you'll do is, it's a really quick process. It's only going to be like maybe a week per environment, to take that EPBCS application that you have, and you'll snapshot it, you'll bring it over, and you'll upload it in your EPM world, and it should come over almost completely flawlessly, and now it will be in under your EPM umbrella. You need to validate that, maybe rework some of the data flows and connections, but it's pretty simple to move something from an EPBCS or PBCS environment up under EPM Enterprise, and then you can just turn off. I'm sure that Oracle is working with you on the licensing there, and there's got to be a future plan to get all of your disparate products. If you've got account reconciliation here and profitability here and close there and planning there, and you want to go to that umbrella, you've got to be able to buy that, move all the stuff in, and turn all the other stuff off again. So that's the way that will work. A question about the best way to pass information between two applications that have freeform. You typically you can create within each one of those applications a connection to the other applications, and then there's a number of ways that you can pass data around. They're gradually adding more and more capabilities to tie all your different instances together. And even within a single navigation flow like I was describing, I can have forms rendered from different instances. Multiple free forms, multiple planning, multiple close. If one person needs to see data and forms and information, dashboards rendered from multiple places, that's all coming together. Now that everything's under one umbrella, everything needs to almost look seamless to the end user. And they're doing that, data maps and things like that. That's just becoming more and more and more powerful ways to make it all look like a single integrated environment with data moving around pretty freely among them. So I did have a question come in about Workiva. I'm going to have to maybe defer you to, in the interest of time, to the webinar that we're doing in 2 weeks' time about that. It will address that. The difference between Workiva and narrative is actually quite different, though, just to give you the heads up. Workiva reporting isn't really going to give you that marrying text together with the grids as well as narrative reporting does. That place where narrative reporting shines is where I'm be able to write paragraphs of text and integrate that together with my grid style reporting. One final thing, because of all the tumultuous events that are going on in 2020, if you have regular PBCS now, Oracle is giving away when they first did it, it was 6 months. I'm not sure if they've extended that or not. You can use strategic modeling out in EPM for free right now to try to figure out what you need to do to change direction on your business. If you're interested in going out and looking at that, adding that technology to your stack, there's a lot of companies that got caught flat-footed without an ability to really re-forecast in an agile way when all these totally unexpected events occurred. This is a tool that helps you do that. There's a lot of interest in that right now. The webinar next week is going to talk about this. And if you are interested in taking advantage of this, turning that on and using it for free for a little while, we can help you do that. If you want to drop a line here to info@nrl.com, we can help you with that. With that, we have reached the very top of the hour. We're ending right on time. Thank you all for tuning in and your questions and your attention. I hope this has been really helpful. I'm excited about freeform planning myself. I'm having a lot of fun working with it, testing it, putting it through the paces, providing feedback back to Oracle so they can make it better. And I hope that'll be part of your future, and you're going to take good advantage of that once you get out and you're using EPM Cloud and using it to the fullest. So again, thank you very much for tuning in. This has again been Joe Altman broadcasting to you live from Northern Atlanta, Georgia. I'll see you next time. Have a good evening.